Well, thank you very much. And it's my pleasure to be invited to the Institute of Work and Health. And hopefully today I can give you a quick snapshot of the program at Magna. I know that here you work with many different industries, many companies, and I think this will be a good learning process in the sense of hopefully there are certain things you can learn and apply to whatever area or research that you guys are involved with. So today I'm going to go through these 7 major areas. And within these areas, I did want to first talk about Magna International, which is our company, again, to give you a scope of the application of our ergonomics program and how we've done it in our facility. First off, Magna is a global company and has presence around all over the world. And we're definitely growing in certain areas such as Asia and South America, more so these last few years. But you can see from the map that we have over 296 manufacturing sites, 88 engineering development sites, approximately 115,000 employees. Our revenue last year was about $28 billion. So some of the capabilities of our facility, we are what we call a Tier 1 automotive supplier. So we're the level right under the original equipment manufacturers. So whether it's Ford, GM, Chrysler, BMW, Volkswagen, we develop and build and manufacture the parts, and we send them to these assembly plants to put into their vehicles, and that's where they assemble them. And so you can imagine, I would say that we pretty much build everything in the car that you can think of, except for tires, but everything else we have some of our hands into. So here are just some of the areas and that we're involved with. But as you see each of the areas, this is also how the structure of our company is. That each group is sort of its own entity, so that each of these groups will have their own president, finance group, etc. So that's this is the other half. Here we have some power system. We have a hybrid, e-car, electric car group, electronics group, chassis. So it's a quite separated into different type of capabilities, and that's how our company structure is. And that's one thing I wanted to just leave you with our company is that we feel it's unique for a number of reasons. One of them is that, of course, it has an employee charter and corporate constitution, but it really is a company that is a decentralized management system. And in a lot of ways, that was kind of the foundation of how the company was built. The founder, Frank Stronach, really believed in giving ownership to individual plants and managers to have control and really create their business from their own. So it's a very flat organization in that sense. But since we've grown so much, we've challenged to have to allocate resources together for the things that can be platforms. So ergonomics is one of them where we feel that it could be beneficial to bring everything together. And hopefully today I can show you how we balance between a decentralized type of structure with a centralized system and program. So just a little bit of background in regards to ergonomics, because again, the scope and application of how it works in our company is important. So I wanted to just make sure that you understand where ergonomics fits into our company. First off is that ergonomics falls under the health and safety department, and the health and safety department falls under the umbrella of HR. The Magna corporate team, especially ergonomics, we set the global standards across all those countries, and the plant managers for all those facilities are meeting these global standards, but ultimately reporting to their own specific group presidents. What's interesting also, because we're in the automotive industry, is that the majority, if not most of our plants are non-unionized. And lastly, that most of our plants, due to the size, I mean, our average plant, I mean, there's no average, but if I had to put an average, would be somewhere between 300 to 600 employees. And a lot of times, that number doesn't allow you to justify a full-time ergonomist. So most of our plants do not have a full-time person dedicated to this. Question?
I'm not sure if this qualifies as clarification.
I'll let Gary judge.
Tell me if I'm out of line.
No problem.
The previous slide you had employee empowerment.
Yep.
Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. getting back to this, since the very beginning of the company, one of the most important thing was the employee's charter, which really gives, and one of the charter principles is a safe and healthful workplace. And this really is not just a wall that, just a document that sits on our walls, but something that lived and breathed within our facility. So, for example, empowerment, if they felt that safety or ergonomics was being violated, obviously we have an open door policy. But beyond that, we have a fairness committee. So if they didn't think it was fair, the decision they made, they could bring it up to an unbiased committee. And thirdly, you can't see here, but there's also here in this box is what we call the hotline. So even if the fairness committee doesn't feel you don't have justice, you can go to a sort of a private hotline, and they have investigators to kind of investigate the cases. So in a lot of ways, we feel that was an important way, and I don't want to say for sure, but I think in a way that also helps us with some of the struggles with the unionized, in that sense that they do feel empowered, and then they have their rights, and they're not being infringed on when they're at work.
Great, thank you.
Good question. So I wanted to give you, again, some history, just so I think it has a better feel to see how the development of the program at our company became about. In 2003 to 2005, we ran an ergonomics program, and maybe some of these elements are what you typically see in many manufacturing sites. We had our ergonomics audit, there was an ergonomics section in the health and safety audit. We provided ergonomics community training where we taught ergonomic teams at our plants for 2 days about mainly how to use the industry analysis tools. We implemented design guidelines for launches and new products, and we also importantly facilitated action plan in the sense of how to get things done, how to reduce the risk on the plant floor. So these were many of the things we're doing, and they were working, but we did, after doing a sort of review of some of the gaps in our program, we started to look at what could Magna benefit from. We thought that it could benefit from a more clear structured system. We felt that at the plant level, which is sort of the crux of all the ergonomics activity that happens in those plants, we felt that they needed a little bit more control of the program itself. We felt that right now even an ergonomics team of 3 people with so many plants, that we need to improve two-way communication with them. One ergonomist could not visit every site, you can imagine, even on a yearly basis. So we had to find some way to interact with them more. And then we need to increase the frequency of ergonomics reporting. As I mentioned before, there was an ergonomics section in the health and safety audit. Well, that audit occurred maybe once a year or once every 3 years, and we felt that ergonomics need to be on the front page of things more often. So I'm going to now talk about some of the steps we did to try to implement those improvements. And if I had to break it down into 6 steps, it would be these, and I'm going to talk about them. The important first one is management support, and followed by a pilot project success. I always think that these 2 items can flip-flop on this list. It really depends on your situation. Sometimes you have management support right off the bat, which leads to you to generate a pilot project, or sometimes it takes a good pilot project for you to get that management support. So it all depends on specific situation. From that point, we had to set a criteria, set up our online system, provide support and templates, and then continually evolve our program. So as I said, getting the management support and pilot project happened in 2005. One of our specific groups, this is our Magnas, Magna groups, had particularly high workers' compensation costs, and it was literally in the millions on a yearly basis. And sometimes that's a good opportunity. Despite those bad numbers, it also has the attention of all the senior management and presidents. So it was an excellent opportunity for us to do a pilot project with 11 manufacturing sites. And we set up a very simple quarterly metric system based on these 5 categories. And each quarter, these 11 plants were measured on a red, yellow, and green scorecard. This one-year pilot project, when we did the study of the workers' compensation cost the following 2 years, we showed that there was a direct rebate cost of over $2.5 million, literally a check written back to these facilities, some in the US and some in Canada. And because of this successful pilot project, Magna took this as an opportunity to see those savings, and more importantly, see us reduce our musculoskeletal disorders globally. So this eventually got support from our group president and ultimately the board of directors. And this was our signal that we are to put a plan together to roll this out globally. So when we were tasked to kind of take a look at, how do we even roll out such a program to such a large geographic area and a large population. So we had to put together some kind of strategy. So some of our first steps was to start, I wouldn't say small, but in a smaller piece of the pie. So we decided that we would start with North America, which is Canada, US, and Mexico, and this was approximately 120 plants. We would try to learn the good and the bad things from our development and launch and try to apply that to the rest of the countries. So we started with North America. We spent a lot of time on this second element here, which is setting a standard set of criteria elements. Our team, we spent many months looking at a lot of literature, a lot of textbooks, a lot of research in the field, in ergonomics, to kind of take a look at what have been some common factors in these research and textbooks that have shown that have been success to an ergonomics program. I think there are many articles written as well, and through this process we were able to nail down a set of criteria, in this case 26 criteria items that we felt was fundamentally the backbone of this structure. Through that standard set of elements, we also understood that in anything to work in our environment, it was important that it had a robust scoring method. Lastly, being that it had to be distributed to many plants and there has to be almost a day-to-day interaction with the requirements, we felt it was essential to have a ergonomics database or website for them to continually update. So this allowed them to understand whenever they needed the corporate requirements, which is those standard set of criteria. It allowed them to download and use the different tools and templates in our program. A lot of changes, any news or any updates, this could be definitely done much faster. And lastly, as I mentioned, it allowed, and you'll see later on, a feedback mechanism for the people at the corporate department to interact with them more frequently. So as I mentioned, there was a set of criteria elements. And what I want to show you now are sort of the structure of how these elements are put together. We established this type of format, which is very familiar maybe to a lot of people, which is very similar to PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act, or a lot of the quality types of continuous improvement models are based on this. But our model is looking at basically establishing a support infrastructure for your ergonomics program, and then analyzing jobs, proactive jobs or reactive jobs, and then prioritizing them, implementing, following up, and then communicating and measuring the results. These 5 blue boxes are the 5 categories that were taken from that pilot project, and ultimately the ones that we launched in 2007. And these 5 boxes also work very well together in the sense of a flow chart. So as I said, the first step was developing the support infrastructure, led to analysis and prioritization, which are typically of the jobs that are already on the plant floor. Engineering design deals with more new lines or launch mode. And both of these would lead to identification of risk, but more importantly, implementation of change and risk reduction. And lastly, any good program needs to take metrics to really know if the system in itself is working or not. So this was something that the plants had done in a self-evaluation system. The plants would submit documentation, enter information into the database, and they would give themselves a self-evaluation instead of, in the sense of checking off these different criteria elements. And we'll see that in a bit. But it's important to see that each of these categories receive a single itself colored dot which indicate their performance, and they all combine together to an overall performance rating. So here is a very snapshot of the system, and almost, if you want to say, a roadmap of our program. And you can see in the gray rows, here are the categories that I was speaking about. But below that, you can see are the individual criteria elements that the plants were responsible for. One of the things we also did was also provide a value column, and this allowed communication to the plants to understand which ones were more important in an effective ergonomics program, but more importantly also which ones had heavier weight in their scoring. Status is simply if they've completed it or not, and documents you would track when they attached them and if they did attach them at all. These red flags you see on this page are produced by corporate. This is the product of our corporate review. So even though it's a self-assessment every quarter, one ergonomist will go through each of their assessments once per quarter and evaluate whether they've been grading themselves correctly. And if for some reason their documentation or information didn't meet the criteria, we would remove the check mark and then put a flag and communicate to them exactly why this was done. So if I went into criteria 1.1, which is basically having a policy and procedure, I clicked onto this link, you would see this page here. So within the deeper detail page, you can see that there's a more definitive description of what's required and what to attach if there is a document required. And they can easily pull this off their network drive or their C drive and attach to the system. And then lastly, they would check off criteria, and criteria is complete. What we also tried to do was provide templates. We know that a lot of these things may take some time to create yourself. So we wanted to make sure that that wasn't going to be a roadblock. As you can imagine, with so many criteria items, it could be overwhelming to try to create these templates yourself. So for example, for the policy and procedure, we provided a framework, a sample policy and procedure, and it was really up to the plants themselves to customize it to what makes sense. They could take out certain sections, they could put in things that were related to their plant specifically, but it was really something that they had to take ownership of and recreate. And this is a snapshot, as I said, of when there was some feedback given if they didn't meet the criterion. Here was the box at the bottom here where we provide that information. And also, there's also a box here where it says comments. The comments box was also for the plant themselves to communicate with us. And again, to ensure that there was good two-way communication. So it's been 5 years, and you can see by the rows of... Sure,
so
go ahead.
Can you go back to the previous slide, please? So you use Ergo or any other assessment tool. So there is no unique or specific assessment tool that you use for risk assessment, or because you're going to train them to do those?
It's a good question.
Like
Your question is about what assessment tools are they using? Was there a mandatory requirement?
Yep.
Similar to our decentralized format, part of our philosophy, not just in the company but ergonomics, is that we don't want to necessarily dictate which tools to use. We definitely have a standard set that we teach in our 2 days ergonomics training. And you can imagine with most groups that are pretty green in ergonomics, they don't want to choose, they just want to know what to use. So I would say for 80% of the plants, they use the standard set of tools, many of them industry tools like MIOSHA, lifting equation, Snook tables, strain index, Rula. But as we're expanding globally, we're finding this challenging because people in Europe use different tools, people in South America, even Mexico, use some different tools, and we're evaluating whether, first off, they're valid tools. That's the first important thing. And if they are valid, how do we tie that in to our system? So hopefully that answers your question. So we do have a standard set, but they're not constrained to those tools. So after each quarter, you can see that this is sort of a report card that a general manager or a plant manager can take a look at, or even the HR manager, and see how the plant is doing in regards to ergonomics in each of the categories. This next section, what I want to try to do, because I grazed over some of the criteria, is really give you some highlights of some of these criteria elements. I think it's important because I think that's the sort of the most important part, is really what's at the base level of what are some of the activity that's really driving good progress as far as reducing risk on our plants. I don't have time today to necessarily go through every single item, but I did want to highlight the different strengths and weaknesses that we've learned, more so a lesson learned in the last 5 years, and hopefully that will be helpful to you guys. So as I mentioned, category 1, I'm going to go through this by each category. Category 1 was really developed with the criteria items to look at a few things. To develop a systematic policy and procedure, to put together an ergonomics committee that meets on a monthly basis or bi-weekly, to get the proper people trained, which includes the management team, supervisors, operators, and also the committee members. So this, typically the support infrastructure, a lot of these elements were some of the ones that many of the plants who just started off new would have to get involved with. So some of the strengths we found from evaluating these plants over the last 5 years, where we felt that for management training, that the web training itself for the management team was very effective. The management training is a high-level training that looks at maybe similar to the same things you're looking at, the scoring method, how you're being evaluated, the categories. But this is a 1-hour presentation, and it didn't make sense for us to go to each site to do this. So we offer a web training for the management team 2 out of every 3 months, and it's up to them to schedule their team for a time that works for them. One of the criteria elements, which is very key, was that it was required that the engineering manager led the ergonomics team at these facilities, and that ended up paying out very good dividends. We'll talk about that in a second. The ergonomics committee meetings had to be separate from the joint health and safety committee meetings. I know it was very common practice that people will try to fuse the JHSC together with the ergonomics team, but we felt it was important that there was a separate time, a separate team, and ultimately separate focus on this topic alone, and not the tail end of a joint health and safety committee meeting. And lastly, we saw that there were some very innovative ways that the ergonomics coordinators found to train their supervisors and operators. So one of our requirements is that each operator, worker, and supervisor in the whole plant needs to be trained in the basic ergonomic awareness risk factors, roughly around 45 minutes. But it was up to the coordinators to do that. Of course, we would go through a train-the-trainer program, and we provided them the templates and the PowerPoints to do that. But they had to, from an organizational standpoint, figure out a way to do that with 300, 500, 600 people. Some of the challenges that we realized over the years was, as I showed you, a policy and procedure template was available, but we found that many of them just didn't really tailor it to their specific facility. And people are busy, and we realized that in our next iteration we had to structure the framework of a policy and procedure, so maybe have the categories, but have them fill out the guts of it, and not just have all the information in there. One of the requirements in this category was setting a budget. And what we realized also is that they received credit for setting a budget, but a lot of times when they had to get the money for an ergonomic solution, there was no money there, especially at year end, that if the budget's used up, it's used up. Lastly, we had a lot of initial resistance, and we knew that was coming when we set one of the criteria items as the engineering manager to lead the committee. You can imagine an engineering manager at an automotive plant that they have a lot of responsibility, and one extra one was not so nicely taken all the time. But we knew it was very fundamental, and so there was a lot of resistance that we had to fight through in the beginning. But now looking back, when I think about a lot of the engineering managers that pushed back a lot at the beginning, some of them now are the biggest champions of our program. And what I learned from that was that even though there's initial resistance at the beginning, especially from management or engineering, that it's important that we push through that as ergonomists. And a lot of the times for a lot of engineering managers, they didn't realize how much ergonomics affects their job. And I think the ones that really took it to heart are the ones that are improving their quality, improving their productivity, efficiency, working together with ergonomics. And that's really where we want to be.
What's the main role of those individuals? Like, are they core to operations? Are they more technical specialists?
Sure. The engineering managers?
Yeah.
In their normal capacity or in relation to?
In the normal one.
There's a number of hats they wear. So they would be in charge of the process on the plant floor. So usually the engineering manager would have a team of process engineers that would make sure that production is being made, the quality is good. But they're also tasked with new business. I mean, we get a lot of new contracts. Our contracts are typically 4 or 5 years, and they're out there quoting, looking at CAD models, designs, and bringing in new business. So that would be their core jobs. Anything related to engineering, you name it, they're in charge of it.
And they would, you might have said at the beginning, they report to the plant manager? Or?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. The engineering manager reports to the plant manager.
Kind of second in command then?
Yeah, I would say
The
typically our plants have a plant manager, but then we have what we call an assistant general manager.
Mm-hmm.
So the engineering manager would either report to the assistant general manager or the plant manager.
Thank you.
Good question. So category 2 is analysis and prioritization. And this criteria under this category really looked at, are the plants doing assessments, and are they prioritizing those assessments by risk? One of the templates that they used, or I'd say 80 to 90% of the plants ended up using, was something we call the Ergonomic Risk Management Spreadsheet. This was an Excel tool that had a lot of what we call fancy macros in it that allowed you to list all the jobs in the first column, but then you could see the score ratings depending on the different tools they used. You could compare them across for the same job. And the macros kicked in were that the numbers that you entered would automatically color code the cells in order to give you an idea of risk. And you can see this is just our sort of what we call the priority matrix. So here you can look at a high-level view of all the jobs and all the tools used. But individually, they had tabs at the bottom of different spreadsheets where they would enter this information depending on what tool they were using. So some of the strengths of this particular category of prioritization, analysis and prioritization, we asked the plants at a minimum to conduct 9 job evaluations per quarter, or 3 per month. And this was a minimum. We felt that was important because we didn't want to put the pressure on them to say, you need to have all your jobs assessed. Some of our plants even have 100 or 200 jobs. And you could spend a couple years before you finish assessing all those jobs on your plant floor. So we thought that is important that we gave them a sizable chunk, and that as soon as you have a bank of jobs that are analyzed, we should start working on making some changes and fixes and getting the team moving. Another strength was that spreadsheet I just showed you, the ergonomic risk management spreadsheet. It tied all the information into one area. It made prioritization much easier, and it allowed a central point for them to enter their analyses and to manage these things. Some of the challenges with this category was that with anything you design in, and any of you guys who have designed anything sophisticated in Excel, there's a lot of corrupted cells, and when a plant had did something by accident, sometimes it's very hard to reverse. So the reliability of this spreadsheet or Excel, at times was troublesome. And they would have to, let's say, redo it, not redo it, but cut and paste and start fresh again because we couldn't figure out from the programming standpoint what was wrong with it. But also one of the challenges is that a lot of our ergonomics teams might have, not a lot, but some of them had what we call one-man shows, where there was an ergonomics coordinator who pretty much did all the assessments and probably did a lot of the work. And the fallback of that was the whole team gets the training. But if you're not using those analysis tools and analyzing and looking at jobs on a regular basis, you're going to forget how to use those tools. And the discussion in those team meetings start to be less effective. Question?
What are the members of the ergonomic team, I'd say?
Okay, good question. What was the size of the typical ergonomics team? We don't limit the size, but I think what we recommend is anywhere from 6 to 12.
Okay.
I think it depends on the size of your plant. In our criteria, if you looked in a little bit deeper, you would see that there was a minimum requirement. The minimum requirement was 1 engineer, 2 production workers, 1 supervisor, and 1 maintenance worker, and the ergonomics coordinator. But other than that, it was really up to the plants to figure out who their important people were. So and that was an important thing, and it gets back to the decentralized flexibility aspect, is that we have a certain requirement, as you can see, that you need to meet, but it's up to you to really figure out what the best way to do that. So it allows you to make those decisions and ownership from that, from your standpoint.
Do you think any company has like a decision-making issue? Because as you mentioned now, the members of the ergonomic team are like workers, or they're not from management kind of level. So, for example, they came out with kind of a solution or prioritize something, and they want to implement that, but the management say no. For example, we do not have budget for this, or it's not on priority right now.
Right.
So what would happen to those? Do they die at that point, or there's another process that can involve?
Right. I think if there was, and I think that comes back to a lot of the importance of management support, and a lot of the roadblocks, you're absolutely right, and what we'll see in this category as my challenges is the money and the resources. Sometimes there's support to get things changed, because that ultimately is the hardest part, I'll tell you that much after many years. I mean, we had requirements, and I'll tie it back to this section. Category 3 is basically evaluating that. How is the ergonomics team doing as far as implementing change and reducing the risk on the plant floor? The main areas in this, we're asking them to put together a detailed action plan, that they had to come up with the top 5 and then close it out in 90 days or less. That was the requirement. If they didn't hit that 90 days, then they wouldn't get credit on the criteria item. And of course, they had to do a follow-up analysis in order to justify that their solution, in fact, did reduce the risk. And I'll get to that in a second to fully answer your question. So the strengths of this format we found was that in order to what we call close out an ergonomic issue, the solution itself had to show risk reduction. So what that means is that there had to be an analysis tool done before as a baseline, and then after you put the solution in, you have to reevaluate it using the same ergonomic tool, and it has to show at least 1 level of risk reduction. So that was important because we felt that, sometimes people make changes, but maybe it increases the risk. But this ensured that the changes were impactful. Secondly, which you may not didn't get to, but importantly, what we asked the plants was that one solution per quarter. I mean, they might be 5 or 6 solutions they put together per quarter, but one of them they had to demonstrate productivity or quality improvement. And really that was to start to bridge the gap between ergonomics, quality, and productivity, because there is a very strong relationship to our business objectives. Our business model has been for many years, better product for a better price. And if we can tie these solutions that sometimes cost money, as you mentioned, some of the struggles, by tying them back to saying reducing cycle time, we've seen reducing, improving the number of parts per shift, these things, or we've seen some studies where the quality is improved 20% at times when we've implemented the ergonomic solution. So these were some of the ways where we got around the struggle of getting money for some of those solutions. But at the end of the day, it did require management, even if it didn't show these gains, to shell out some money in order to protect our workers. Some of the challenges with our format was that having a top 5, which was what we initially called it, a lot of the plants would put their top 5 high-risk jobs. And typically, if you've ever seen maybe a list of ergonomic issues, your top 5 are probably the hardest to fix and sometimes the most expensive. So we ran into the problem that it sort of created a logjam of things to do, and we quickly realized that they could put 2 separate action plans together. You could have a top 5, but you could also have an action plan with quick fixes, or you could tie them together. But we didn't want to lose the opportunity to fix things that can be quickly changed and improved. So that was sort of what we developed over the years. The action plans were also templates used from Excel. We found that these spreadsheets were, at the end of the day, a little bit disorganized. That's coming from someone who reviewed many action plans, because we do that quarterly audit. But even if we were confused, you can imagine their own management team or themselves how disorganized it was. So there were some issues with that, and I think I just talked about that. Was definitely there continued to be some issues with just getting the money and the support. But I believe that's sort of continuous improvement area where as the culture changed and the importance of ergonomics occurs, you're going to see more and more support for that. But we've seen quite a big change in the last 5 years. Category 4 is the engineering design, and really this category looks at mainly launches or new products or new workstations that are coming into our facility. We want to make sure that they have an official system where they need to go through a design checklist in order to, before they put a actual workstation on the plant floor. So a lot of these criteria elements look at ensuring that their ergonomics is part of the engineer's design process.
What's Jack's software? Is that something internal?
Nope, that's I can show you in this next slide, but that's a good question. One of our strengths for this was that they didn't really involve ergonomics design in their engineering process, so this required it, and many of our plants now have this. Secondly, when they filled out the design checklist, not only did the responsible launch engineer have to sign off on it, a member of the ergonomics committee had to sign off, and that allowed a full closed loop of accountability. Here is the Jack. Here are some images of our Jack software. That is a product provided by Siemens. It's used in many different university settings and many of the automotive OEMs as well. It's a ergonomics simulation sort of software. The challenge we had with that is that it's something that we owned. We worked with a lot of plants on more complex simulations and assembly lines, but it was a bottleneck. I say this is a challenge because it's a bottleneck. There's only limited time that we had, and really we had to sort of pick and choose where we could use this simulation software, although it was very effective. the checklist, which I showed you, I think is the main way that plants are ensuring ergonomics in their design. And there was one difficult part was just when that checklist is being completed. We wanted to make sure that it was done up front, but our system didn't really explain to you when that checklist. So a lot of the times we found that the design checklist was on the final buy-off stage. And so at the final buy-off stage with our vendor who built these workstations, it's almost too late. So it was important that we would specify when, and sometimes there's different prototypes, and that really in reality you should be checking with that design spec all the way through. The last category is metrics and communication. And the criteria under this category really looked at two important things. One was that you were tracking your statistics specifically for ergonomics-related injuries or MSDs. And secondly, that the work that you're doing with the committee, the solutions, the statistics, that you are sharing this with the rest of the plant and improving the awareness and culture of this program and the elements. So some of the strengths we found were that that a lot of the plants we figured out only tracked health and safety statistics, such as incidences, lost time, modified days, and this required them to break out separately how many of those total health and safety incidences were related to ergonomics. And again, one of the requirements for communication was that they put together a simple before and after template where they would show simple pictures and descriptions and post these on the plant bulletin boards. And this would definitely increase the awareness of what the committee was doing, but more importantly, just teaching them the important principles of ergonomics to the shop floor employees. As you can imagine, if we got at least one of these per quarter, that was the requirement, we suddenly would start to build a pretty large database of simple before and afters. So one of the things we developed on the side of this was an ergonomics solution database. So we took those simple changes and put this all online simply because the plants could use each other, even though they don't see each other's plants. They could actually type in keywords or see some of the simple concepts or quick fixes or changes that other plants did and really learn from the other groups. We would provide information as to where it came from so they could directly contact them if they had further questions. Lastly, the challenge of this particular category, I would say that one of the requirements we had was to track short-term metrics. So when I say short-term metrics, they would be how many workstations did you assess this quarter, how many people were trained. We call these short-term metrics because you could quickly in a short time show improvement and it helps you drive your process. But we found that this was pretty redundant and that the plants didn't really use this effectively, so we eliminated the short-term metrics. One of the other elements was to ask the plants to set targets for MSDs and obviously reduction targets. But because we didn't set specific global metric standard for a target, because I think it's very difficult to do that, knowing the different factories we have and different sizes, we left it up to them to set their own targets. But knowing that, but I think in the end what happened was that these targets that were set, what we found were not very effective targets when they were tasked to set them themselves. So hopefully I gave you a little bit of snapshots of how some of the elements, and I think that was very important for you to see some of the things that the plants were required to do to get to where we are. But what I wanted to show you now is after 5 years, we started collecting statistics because it's important. Just like we preach metrics and communication as a global program, we also need to demonstrate, some metrics to see if in fact, this system or these quarterly metrics are working. So if I had to graph out our, let's say, 120 plants roughly in North America since we started in 2007, you can see that these numbers show how many plants or a specific overall score. So red obviously is the lowest score you can get, and it shouldn't be a surprise that 70 or 80 of our plants, when we started this program, were all in the overall red. Over the last 5 years, you can see that that's driven down quite low, and the overall green, which is the highest grading you can get in our system, that's slowly risen and is on an upward tick. So as far as a evaluation standpoint of these metrics that we spun out to all the plants, they are definitely heading in the right direction. And a lot of that is, to get where we are today, is a lot of the management support that has changed over the years, as well as engineering support. So with that being said, now that we can see that many of our plants are what we call green. Okay, question? Yeah.
Is it the same 20 plants that remain red in the last 8 quarters?
No, that's a great question, because I think what you're pointing out is that we still have maybe 20 plants that are red. And to tell you the truth, these are mainly new acquisitions. So we take over a lot of plants, or some plants, and when they first start off, they're going to be red. So I think it's plateaued, but it's more indication as we came out of the 2009 downturn in the economy, we started to pick up more plants. But to say that they're all new acquisitions, I would be lying by saying that. I think within the 20, there still are maybe 5 plants that are just low performers. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Sometimes it's just business condition and they're ready to shut down. But for most part, the good news is that they're new acquisitions. Good question. So what does this all mean? That we have a lot of our majority of plants operating what we call as a green level plant. It's important to compare that to our metrics of, musculoskeletal disorders or ergonomics related injuries and the cost to our company. And that would be more an objective way to see whether these metrics are actually doing the right things in the practical sense. So, as I said, we started this in 2007. And when we looked at the percentage of our workers' compensation claims, and let's say in the U.S. alone, that 60 to 70% of our plants, 60 or 70% of our total cost of our claims were related to ergonomics, and that's quite high. But you can see that it's slowly been reducing over the years, and even in 2011, last year, we're down to 45%, which we were looking at 65% only 4 or 5 years ago. So there's been quite an improvement over the years, at least showing that we're heading in the right direction. If we look at the total dollars spent in the U.S. relating to the same graph, you can see back in 07 or 06 that we were spending $11 or $12 million direct cost paying out these workers' compensation claims, and we're averaging around $6 million in the last 3 years. There's a lot of factors that relate to that. Of course, this downturn is somewhat related to possibly less production happening because of the economical downturn. But even the 2012 numbers I look at, we're up as far as the number of plants we have now, and they're all working full hours. We're seeing the same steady state of 6 to 7 million. So again, I think they are good signs that we are heading in the right direction as far as reducing musculoskeletal disorders and reducing the cost to our company. Question?
You're measuring lost time injuries as your economic, or showing that you're winning or losing. Mm-hmm. If a company, a Magna plants, outsource their workers, hire from temp agencies, bring those workers in, those workers get injured, they're not liable to the Magna plant, and therefore they go back to the temp agency, and Magna may not hire them again because they've suffered a lost time injury or an RSI injury.
Right.
Also, what's the culture for the worker to report that they suffered a MSD or an RSI, that this job's not suiting me well? What is the culture there? Because I have to confess, in 1999 I worked for Magna.
Okay.
And I worked 5 years prior, and in 1999 I suffered an RSI injury, bilateral epicondylitis. And I went through hell through the company trying to suppress that it didn't happen at work, that it wasn't work related. It took me 3 years to fight it through workers' comp, the whole rigmarole. And at the end of the day, I lost my job with Magna. No open door policy, nobody to talk to from corporate up in Vaughan. So, you know, I know that companies are going to suppress their workers, don't report your lost time claims. We all, and I'm sure many of you know that's what happens, suppression of lost time claims. So that cannot be a good factor for indicating that it's successful or not. If the worker is afraid to report that they suffer a lost time, or an RSI, or suffering MSD, no matter how minor it is.
Okay. I'll answer, I think there's a few questions there. The first one in regards to non-Magna employees. We do have some employees that are a temp agency, less so now since the economy is a little bit better, but we have that same issue in health and safety, because the same thing, not just ergonomics, but any accident. In some ways, if it's on our turf, it could be our liability in some shape or form. But one of the things we wanted to ensure was that those statistics were being accounted for, not just Magna employees, but the temp workers of our company. So when we track not just the ergonomic MSDs, as you saw each quarter, the safety incidences, we actually include all the temp workers as well. So that's probably true that they may not be on the payroll for their comp costs, but their incident and severity is affecting each of the plants. Secondly, I think your experience at Magna is one that is probably going to happen at certain levels, and it's unfortunate. And I think back in '99, and it's great that I didn't work there yet, but I think if I think about what I do when I started working at Magna in 2002, and when I saw the ergonomics program, there really wasn't much to it in the sense of a structural format, a program. There was no ergonomists at corporate. There was no ergonomists really. I think they might have hired some co-op students here and there, but there was more importantly, there was no accountability and no visibility of ergonomics in general. So I think hopefully you can see that that's changed a little bit in the sense of the importance of ergonomics, and that I think that helps with people being able to come out front and have an injury. I mean, that is a very important issue, because I find in our Ontario plants, which are mainly in the GTA, we have a lot of multicultural facilities. I would say a lot of our plants, half of them are immigrants that have a culture of non-reporting, and that is a very important issue. And that's probably why we spend a lot of emphasis on communication. As I showed you, just some examples, but posting fixes, what the ergonomics is doing, training each employee, and also many of our plants, and you can't see that in the criteria, they also get points for putting together putting in a employee suggestion for ergonomic incidences. So understanding that culture, that people are maybe afraid to report, we found some anonymous avenues, such as a suggestion box, doing surveys, going out onto the floor and doing surveys in order to elicit that. It's going to take some time, and I think that has changed quite a bit in the last 10 years, but it's a continual battle to ensure that people are reporting these injuries. One of the things that we also are very proud of, the plants specifically in Michigan, as this affected maybe 15 to 17 plants in Michigan, was that MIOSHA, which is the Michigan OSHA branch, awarded Magna for the Ergonomic Innovation Award for this quarterly metric system and database. This was given out last year. It was accepted at one of our plants and given by the director of MIOSHA. But it was important that it wasn't just a reward for the metrics itself, just having a system and a database. That's all fine and dandy, but is it really impacting the workers? Is it improving their jobs? And that's why the delegates came on site a number of times to not only look at the program, but they talked to the ergonomics committee, picked shop floor workers, interviewed them one-on-one in a private room, talked to the management team, looked at fixes, looked at the injury statistics, to really ensure that not only is this an innovative system, but it actually led to the right results. So this was rewarded on mainly a lot of the hard work from the people, the ergonomics teams at many of our plants in Michigan and throughout the whole global program, I would say. We are running out of time, so I'm going to want to leave time for some extra questions, but in this last section, what I wanted to show you was some of the improvements, but you know, you can see this afterwards when the slides are up, but there was 3 key areas that we wanted to fix. We needed to put more weight on implementation and risk reduction, as we thought that that was the center core of a good ergonomics program. So we increased the weight of that particular category alone, so we would see more changes on the plant floor. We wanted to bring everything online. You saw that we had a lot of issues with our spreadsheets and Excel. So first off, what we've done this year is develop an online action plan module. And then also we're now taking this ERM spreadsheet, which is the managed spreadsheet with Excel, and we're taking that also into a design all online system. So for example, moving forward now, even though each job has its own sort of entity in itself, whether it's an action related to that specific job, or it's activity, a certain assessment, or a design checklist that's filled out, it would all be on the same page. And you can see one thing we didn't have before was an ability to add all these data inputs online in order to feed all. This creates a much more robust system, as well as a much better archiving methodology that, you know, even the specifics of what postures were selected for this job when we were doing evaluation can now be captured in one central location. And this is our sort of now view, prioritization view. You can see all the jobs, you can see all the assessments, and all the important information. Our goal was always, since we launched it, and now we're coming to full fruition, is to sort of build this one fluid flow of risk data, scores, and action, and reporting all in one fluid process, all integrated together in one system. That was important. And when we launch that Magna database next year, it will be the completion of this 4-pronged approach that we took. So I'm going to end off with just sort of the rest of the global strategy that we are launching, as well as just a summary. As I showed you, this is the map of where we're located across the world. We started, I showed you, most of the stuff that you've learned today is the last 5 years in North America. We've made a lot of changes, and I quickly went over those, including bringing a lot of things online. So we've launched that same program with the improvements in China, just at the beginning of this year, as well as in Europe, which includes breaks down Western and Eastern Europe. And our plan is, as Brazil and South America is growing very quickly, our plan is to launch the same program in 2013, upcoming. So it was important for me to just have one slide to just show you some of the challenges we're facing today, which more relates to a global rollout. Some of the things are languages. We feel it's essential that the ergonomics team is trained and has all their documents in their first language and not working off a second language. So you can imagine the challenge in Europe where we have plants of 14 different languages as their first language, different legislation in different countries, consistency of auditing. Now we have different people auditing across the world as far as the corporate staff, and making sure that those are fair, that a green here is equal to a green in Europe. Training. To find qualified ergonomists in other countries is starting to be challenging. And then also, if we are going over there to do the training, finding it's expensive cost to have interpretation or translators to do that training. And lastly, as I mentioned earlier, there are many tools, especially when you start getting to Europe, that we need to reevaluate. We need to evaluate to see if they're valid, and therefore how we tie it in to the overall system of assessment tools for these Magna plants. So if I had to conclude, and this is the overall summary of today's talk, is that we felt that an effective ergonomics program was developed in the metric system as well because of a few key areas. One is that we established the management engineer support. That was very fundamental to everything that followed. We thought it was very important that we developed a scoring system that was robust and quantitative. I think in our industry, and especially working with engineers and management, everything is about metrics. And this is the kind of language we need to speak in order to get the results. And so this is a very important step. The third step was creating that central database. You can see that they could see where the requirements were, they could get feedback, they understood what was required, they understood how their score was based on. All this was very visible to them, but it was important to create, in our case, a customized database for them to use. And again, I think it was important that they had a tool at their own division. The ergonomics coordinator, the ergonomics team had a tool to manage the program themselves and really bring ownership back to that team and not us. And this also, as I showed you in a number of ways, helped with this database, helped with two-way communication we had with them. Lastly, by them reporting these overall dot scores, I showed you the green, the yellow, the red, by having to report this to upper management every quarter, it ensures progress on a somewhat short-term basis and long-term, but it also ensures that we have accountability to this program on a regular basis. Well, I thank you very much. That concludes my slides, at least anyway, and I hope that there were some things you can learn from, but I think I will take some questions now, but even if we don't have time today, I'm very welcome of you to just send me an email, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you guys may have. Thank you very much.